And we're recording.
Alrighty. Well, hello everyone. Thanks for showing up. I am Tearyne Almendariz. I am technical project manager and a front-end developer over at Bright Plum. And today we're going to be talking about how you can leverage accessibility and user experience principles to serve truly diverse audiences, or cutting through buzzwords and creating a foundation that truly benefits everyone. A little bit about me, the things that I've already said. I worked as a front end web developer for the city of Dallas, and this is where I got a lot of my insights on the things that work for diverse audiences and the things that don't. If you don't know, in Dallas, Texas, we have a large population of people that speak Spanish as their first language. And during my time working for the Civilian Pension Fund, I noticed that there were some things that we did well and some things that we could improve. And a lot of the ways that we were able to fix that was through accessibility and through UX principles. It solved vast majority of our issues. So I did my first talk to talk through that, and I've since revised this to include more of the knowledge I've learned along the way. So if y'all want to share, like on the chat, if you want to unmute, my question is, who are you? Uh, and what I'd like is for people to share their roles and any kinds of marginalizations that you face that you're comfortable with sharing, just so we get an understanding of like who everyone is.
Sure, I can start just to make sure there's not a lot of awkward silence.
Thanks, Frederick.
My name is Frederick. Yeah, I'm the principal at Bright Plum. I think the biggest thing that I notice, I wouldn't say it bothers me. I guess maybe just because I've grown a little bit thicker skin, is some of the technical languages. Technical languages rooted in kind of different tropes. So, I mean, at the minimum, you have master slave. Those are technical things that describe two pieces of technology, where one is supposed to be the main, and the second one is supposed to be the secondary. But obviously, those two words kind of imply certain things. And then I also try really hard to pay attention to sexist language as well. And so the other thing that I've noticed is just the demonization of women's roles within technology in general, and how we default certain, I don't know, technical terms or even, users and roles and variables towards more of kind of a default male perspective. It doesn't specifically, obviously, as a heterosexual man, doesn't specifically affect me per se, but it is something that I care about, and I do feel there's a significant marginalization there.
Thanks for sharing.
I'll go next. I have all kinds of hidden, unnoticeable differences about me that, when you look at a speaker page or an organizer page, I come off as a white developer, but I am extremely hard of hearing. I have to use assistive devices to hear. I am married to a trans woman, and I don't necessarily, well, what affects her affects me because we're married, that kind of thing, that marginalization and that exclusion that we face. But we also both realize that we live in Northern California, and we're very privileged that we live in a very, very friendly community, so we don't face a lot of some of the same things that other people might face around being trans. And then I'm a hospice nurse by trade. So technology, I notice a lot of accessibility things. And so I'm drawn to inclusion, to include everybody, not just, all of those little things that you can't see. So I'm a big advocate for accessibility.
Thanks, Amy June. Does anybody else want to go? Like one more person? If not, that is also fine. Alrighty. So on the meetup, I posted a sneak peek of the questions for our pop quiz today. So if you want to share it in the chat, or if you would like to share out loud, like to you, what does diversity mean? Like, what is diversity? You can also shout out. Let's shout out. It's fun.
I'll go for that one. To me, diversity means not expecting people to be not judging a book by their cover. So everybody can just be who they are and know what they know, and not bring it down because of what they look like on the outside. Because you'll never know what they look like or what they are on the inside if you don't get past the outside. And to me, diversity is making sure that you don't judge that book by its cover.
Thanks, Mark. I see Amy June saying that to her. Diversity is hearing other voices. Okay, so next question. I promise there's only one more. What is inclusion? I think, Mark, part of what you described was inclusion.
So I say inclusion doesn't work without diversity, and diversity doesn't work without inclusion. So diversity is a representation of everyone. So you bring in a lot of people, but if there is no inclusion when you bring in, then the purpose is not solved. So diversity is bringing everyone, say, to like a party, and inclusion is like serving the right kind of food for everyone that they deserve.
Thanks, Prem. That's actually one of my favorite ways to hear about diversity and inclusion. There's inviting people to a thing and then having them be part of it, like asking a person to dance is what I've heard. So, yeah.
Yep.
So when we talk about diversity and inclusion in tech, or when we hear it talked about, often people are presenting it as the act of building products that include marginalized people, but they're doing it based on group membership. So these group memberships, from the experiences that I've had, like as a developer and as a person who, and for people who might not be able to see me, I'm a Black woman. I'm a Black cisgender woman, and so sometimes people get into the stereotypes of, oh, well, I understand what it is that you mean, because sometimes when we are trying to get to know one another, we're not really doing it on a deeper level. It's like, oh, well, Tearyne is Black and a woman, so maybe she grew up in a broken household and, she didn't have her dad at home, because these are stereotypes that exist in communities, right? In actuality, both of my parents went to college. I am doing pretty well because I am a person that works in tech, and I was college educated. But when you follow paths of shallow knowledge and working just off of stereotypes, you end up with things like this. So this is a picture of a bunch of different people holding hands in a circle, and all the hands are different colors. It's supposed to be representative of different races. Who has ever had to plug one of these onto the website for diversity and inclusion? Maybe the marketing team sent it over. My favorite one is this one where everyone's smiling and happy and kumbaya, and it's like, we are a diverse company. We have put pictures of marginalized people on our website. For me, I feel like we need to get beyond surface fluff in order to really serve these audiences of people. Instead of us just giving lip service to diversity, we should really be looking at what actionable steps we can take to build products that foster inclusion. So things that we'll talk about here are going to be diversity in theory versus diversity in practice. I'm going to share some ways that I worked up in trying to achieve my goals, because I didn't learn this stuff without having messed up a couple times myself. Also the things that have worked, victories and failures, and also processes that you can change to improve your website experience for people, as well as tools that you can use to achieve better results for your audiences. So with diversity in theory and diversity in practice, we've already talked about this picture. This is the theoretical one. Here, this next one is going to be another item. Does anybody know what this is or what it's supposed to represent? For those that are wondering, it's an H that has an arrow that's going through it in black with red candles on one side, a black candle in the middle, and green candles on the far right side.
Could it be Jewish people for Hillary?
No, you were very
Yeah, I was going to
close,
say
though.
Black people for Hillary. Is that
It's
a Kwanzaa
supposed to be
thing?
Black people for Hillary.
Is
So
it Kwanzaa? Okay.
it's Kwanzaa. So what happened is that, unfortunately, during the Hillary Clinton campaign, there were some things that they did where they were trying to invite people to the party and let them know, hey, we're one of you. We understand what you're going through. And this was an icon that was pasted, or it was presented for Kwanzaa on the Hillary Clinton Twitter site. And Black Twitter kind of went off because it's like, hey, we appreciate that. Maybe you did this thing, but maybe can we also have policies? There's some links in the slides that I will share with y'all. But it didn't go over well because it was an attempt to be quote unquote Black friendly is how some people called it, but it wasn't like it wasn't serving the actual needs that the audience they were aiming for needed. These things are gestural attempts at being inclusive. Usually they're not very representative. So when we talk about diversity in theory, they're diverse approaches that don't reflect or address people's realities and their day-to-day needs. I went to a conference and there was a very good story. I apologize to whoever the company was because I cannot remember and I haven't been able to find them scouring the internet. But they talked about how they had a website that was supposed to service people who suffered from type 2 diabetes. And initially, when they did their marketing, they had all these pictures that were up that were on the site. It was a very beautiful site, but they had pictures of a guy who was very fit, a very fit white guy. It was on all the products, and it alienated the people in the populations that actually needed the tool. Most people that suffer from type 2 diabetes, at least in the United States, end up being people who are overweight. They are Black and Latino people, and often the people that go to the website are family members who are seeking information on behalf of a parent because they're trying to help out with an older parent usually. And when they really looked at how the site was being perceived and changed up some of the ways that the content even on the site was structured. So changing from just like, here's information for you, for here's information for if you're here trying to find something to help a family member. Changing that branding, they saw the adoption of the tools improve, they got more questions, it was really great. So I'm going to try harder to find the information on that company because it was great and I'd like to share that. So for folks that maybe have not had this experience, like, have you ever been directed to like a website to do something on your phone and you got like a really shoddy mobile experience? Parking websites, I find, do that a lot. Has anybody ever been to one of those sites that's like, here, scan this and go and pay online? Let me see. Well, do people have cars in California a lot? I think so.
Well, so in New Mexico, parking is pretty much abundant, so we don't have that issue. But yeah, I can't relate to that. The few mobile experiences I've had with pay online have been pretty decent. Sorry.
Yeah, that's okay. Well, sometimes in Dallas, like we have just like parking lots and parking lots. I see Arena says parking is a great example. Arena, was there anything that you wanted to share about your experience with a parking site?
Well, it was very quick experience. It didn't work for me.
Yep.
So this is ongoing problem, and it just wasn't well thought through. And I can't even blame these people. It just didn't work.
Yeah.
And not to mention like people who are not that technologically. I mean, I'm pretty technologically advanced. It's not like I don't know where to click on the phone, but yeah, that's that is very sad. There's a lot of very sad stories about that.
Yeah. So you get told, well, this site is for you. This is for you to go and park your car and it'll be fast and it's efficient. But then when you actually go to the site, you have this experience that's clunky most of the time. Mark got lucky, but usually it just doesn't work on your phone. Like they want you to download an app and it's a bad user experience that's supposed to be meant for you, the mobile user. I know when I encounter that in Dallas, if it takes too long, I'm just going to leave the site. Like I'll just whip out my card, go pay at the pay stall rather than deal with the website. And so when we end up designing our sites, trying to do it by this theoretical diversity model, like not actually taking people's needs into account, people are doing that walk away thing with our websites. but instead they're just clicking out and they're never going to go back. They're going to go back to Google, find somebody else that actually understands what it is that they need, that they're going through. With diversity in practice, we're taking deeper looks at the diverse populations. And I put diverse in quotes because it's kind of like different from who usually those of us who are developers, like people that, how do I talk about this? So usually I am the only woman, and usually the only woman of color that's on my team. And so without those perspectives and without hearing that, you know, people tend to develop for what they know and or what they've been told. Like sometimes people don't even go to ask users like, what is it that you need, or what are the experiences that you're having? But looking at our diverse populations more accurately to identify the issues that the people in that group may have. I give you all an example. I'm college educated, I'm Black, but I have like these privileges of my own, right? Frederick, thanks, Amy June. I see Frederick has his hand up. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you had stated earlier, had anyone experienced the parking thing? I was trying to use the reaction to say that yes, I had. I should have pressed the lower hand afterwards. I apologize.
No,
I thought it would automatically go away. That's an accessibility failure on this app.
Or it could be a timing thing where they were like, oh, well, we don't want it to go away. Now I have the participant list up. Thanks, Amy June. But when we look more deeply at the issues that people are actually facing, we get better experiences, and people are happy and they come to our websites and then our bosses are happy, generally, knock on wood. So there's an easy way for us to do that. We should be basing our product solutions on accessibility and UX principles, because that will help us to serve multiple groups. Parts of this are because when you develop on mobile first, that matters. Developing on mobile first helps to solve problems for users with disabilities and other audiences, especially people in populations that are dependent on their mobile devices as their only way to access the internet. I feel like we don't talk enough about how people from different income and class stratas access the internet. Sometimes when we are in our offices, we just think about, well, I'm in an office and this is how I would do it on my computer, or this is how I would do it on my tablet, or this is how I would do it on my, what is it called? When the phone is the flagship phone experience. If somebody's on Boost Mobile, they don't have like iPhone 12, like some people do, but a lot of people are accessing it from devices that don't have as much RAM. Mobile first also results in things like faster load times, smaller images, tap and swipe gestures, large touch targets. Those are things that you have to consider. And those also help people that have mobility issues, for example. All of these are going to work toward providing a complete user experience for all of your users. Before I moved on, I wanted to see if anyone had any questions. Okay, cool. These are just some small lists, I think, that alleviate a huge amount of disproportionate impact that happens to people in those populations. We discussed it earlier. Accessibility principles help people with disabilities and improving the experiences. I believe that I've talked about this. But one thing we haven't talked about is the game that we're going to play. So I almost gave away the answer to the game. I need to change that note in my slide. So we're going to play a game where we discuss diversity in theory and diversity in practice. So to me, it's very important for us to break out of our preconceived notions. Even I had notions about it before I'd started working in the public sector, because instead of designing for a very narrow audience of people, I was developing products for people from all different walks of life. People that worked in offices, people that were out in the fields and out in the middle of Timbuktu that were servicing the water. And I also feel like playing games and doing productive thought exercises is a great way to do it, because it's one of the best learning mechanisms that we have as human beings. Like that's how we acquire new skills, and it's how we practice them. And you can actually use it as a mental exploration tool, like with your teams. It helps to get everyone on board with thinking differently. Like just, I found that you get more buy-in like when you include people in the conversation about it, instead of being like, well, you shouldn't do this and the WCAG standard says this is why, or this is an article about this information. People get kind of defensive. So one thing to remember is that you do need to establish some boundaries before you do that, because breaking down stereotypes is an area that can get very messy and is very sensitive. And if you don't set up your boundaries beforehand, things could get ugly. So our rules and boundaries for this exercise, there is a gift that I like a lot. It is a referee that's looking for his yellow card in soccer. You know where it is. One of the players finds it, so he puts it up. But our boundaries here are going to help you to make tasteful suggestions. When we're going through this, you'll see in a minute. I'll explain the rules first. And you primarily want to think of your own lived experiences. So for me, I talked to Amy June about this earlier. There was a summer, and it's why I got into accessibility. There's a summer where I got swimmer's ear. I wasn't swimming. I was a receptionist and didn't realize why everyone else had headsets. And so I was doing this, and oof, it was awful. But I ended up with I couldn't hear out of my right ear for like 2 weeks, and any sound that came in was like really garbled and mechanic sounding. And that's when I realized how valuable closed captioning was. I wasn't able to put in headphones, even in like a loud area. So I found out how many sites do not do closed captioning and how many do not do it effectively. Kat is a colleague of mine that did this presentation with me before, so she's okay with me sharing it. She ended up with a shoulder or arm injury, and because of that, and she works as a developer too, it limited the radius to which she could use her arm, and it impacted her work. When we do this, we're also going to use information that we've learned from credible, typically academic resources. And these are guidelines that you can use with your teams too. Don't just have it be something that you heard on Facebook, experiences of people that you know personally. So like Amy June shared an experience that one of her loved ones had with how they are perceived, how she is perceived differently in the world. We are not going to go into blanket statements like all people, political party X are this, or just absolutisms, things that imply obligations, like people of X gender are supposed to be breadwinners. Like those are things that you want to avoid. They're non-productive, they're non-starters. They don't get us into understanding our fellow humans in ways that we can better serve them. This also is not a blame exercise. We're just looking at the systems as they exist and how we can solve the issues that are present in them. So I'm going to give you a theory group membership, and then we're going to identify areas that accessibility and usability principles and standards can address the group's needs. So our first one, and y'all are welcome to shout these out. You can put them in the chat. I have the chat up now. I have the participants list so I can see it. So poverty is going to be the first group that we look at. So in practice, this is what are the expectations of who might belong to this group that you've seen or heard.
I think few people want to shout out, so I'll start. Uneducated.
Okay. I see Amy June has single parents sometimes. Karen's got low income. Kevin, mentally ill. Frederick, black or brown people. Awesome. So we got the first one, Black, Indigenous, and people of color. Some deeper aspects of this, after all, typically, people in this group are disproportionately low income due to systemic issues. 60% of the population of the United States is white. Those people make up 9% of the poverty rate. For Indigenous persons, they are 1% of the population in the United States, and they have a 24% poverty rate. For Hispanic people, 18% of the population and 19% of the poverty rate. And for Black people, 12% of the population, but with a 22% poverty rate. The information for Asian Pacific Islanders got smashed together, and they don't extrapolate on like if somebody's East Asian, South Asian. So it's not presenting that or multiple races. I have some links that are in the slides. The next group of folks, and I see Prem has those who can't meet their basic needs of food and shelter. Yep. Trans folks are disproportionately represented in those who are impoverished. We've got homelessness, those who are unhoused, and that's in there. Yep, Karen, lower education. Rural areas is actually an area that lots of people overlook. Rural poverty rates were reported at 16.4% in 2017. So it decreased from 18.4%, which was the peak like 30 years before that, but it's much higher than in urban areas where it was 12.9%. So it's like 4%, but that's still a significant number of people. So because of the poverty that people in rural areas face, it impacts all different kinds of areas of life. So it's going to be internet access, access to resources, infrastructure. I think that's something that Prem uplifted, you know, people being able to meet their basic needs when, you know, we're designing websites that need to be on 5G. I think it was a T-Mobile advertised during the Super Bowl. There's often not 5G service out in rural areas. There's also international, Karen says a lack of employment opportunities. That can happen when you're distanced far from the city, right? And international rural poverty is also an issue. I believe that I've heard about the farmers' uprisings out in India. I have some links to that information. I didn't realize that I didn't articulate it out in here, but yeah. Single parents, Amy June, you got that one. 27% of solo parents, who are people living alone with kids, are living in poverty. If you are cohabiting with your partner, you are at a 16% poverty rate. So, all right, people of color. We're going to go from this, we're going to go membership group, the theory part, to in practice, what does this mean? I'll give the first one. So for people of color, we tend to be heavy users of mobile technology. And so the principle of mobile first, when you're designing websites for like that group, it's very important. It says that Black, white, and Latino users have roughly similar smartphone ownership levels. It's around 8 and 10 for all the groups, but we're more reliant on it for our internet access. So for Hispanics, 25% of people are reliant on it for internet, and for 23% of Black people, they are smartphone-only users. What are some other ways that you think that people of color are impacted? I'll give out another one. So I talked about this. A lot of these are similar. So in addition to being like mobile first users, a lot of those households do not have a computer in the home. This group also tends to have multi-generational households. So one of the things that we talked about earlier with the diabetes example, and actually we're seeing that in COVID and the coronavirus epidemic that's happening right now. Lots of people who are people of color tend to live in multi-generational households. So if mom or dad or grandma needs help getting on the internet, you're looking at your core principles of accessibility: perceivable, operable, understandable, and robust. Let's see, it can be like everyone all in one household. I talked about this. People of color, high earners, are underrepresented groups that often care for extended family with their earnings. So, and I went over these other items. And so we also talked about this, people who are disproportionately economically disadvantaged. So that's going to be your poor principals, POUR, and mobile first. I think I also have here, it's a little bit more about people of color. They tend to have a lot more people who are multilingual speakers in their households, 2 or more. I think, Prem, we talked earlier that you understand Hindi and Tamil is your mother tongue, and then you also speak English. So that's definitely a factor. That actually goes to the success criteria of the WCAG standards, 3.11, 3.1.1 and 3.1.2. This is going to impact how you set up your sites and how you structure your pages and do your site offerings, because you want to make sure that the information that you present is at a level that your target intended audience can understand, and that it can be translated out. Thank you, Karen, for helping me while I was stumbling. Using simple language. Amy June, readability. Are there any other things, y'all, that would be important for multilingual speakers? I know one thing here is that there's the systemic disenfranchisement of people in those groups from educational institutions. So you get different levels of cognitive abilities. I had privileges growing up, but I also didn't get access to treatment for an attention deficit issue because it was just not a thing that they did in my school. Naming the language of the page. So there is a setting in Pages where you can go in and tell it what language the page is in. Lots of people don't do that, and they don't realize that it impacts, I can get into it. It just impacts the entire experience that somebody's going to have. If you're looking up, one of the clients that I worked on, they had international sites. And depending on that, Google served them up a different thing. If you look for, I'll say, rabbits online, if you look up rabbits online and you're coming from google.co.jp, you get the Japanese version of the site if you have properly encoded it to say, this is the Japanese version. And if you go to the Spanish language site and it's Spanish Mexico versus Spanish Spain, that will happen. Amy June, screen readers, yep. And we talked about this, different access to educational institutions, potentially leading to different cognitive abilities, plain or speak, right at your user's level. And I think I might actually skip this one. Maybe, let's see. Slow internet speeds. Or someone with no internet in the home. So which groups do y'all think would be impacted by that? Rural. That was actually number 2 on the board. I should, yep, lower income. Seniors. Yep. For rural areas, actually 63% of rural Americans say that they have a broadband internet connection at home, which used to be 35% in 2007. So we're making advancements, but there's still that lack there. Also, mobile technology use for rural adults has risen since 2011. So, does anybody have ideas for what the third one would be? So the homeless and the unhoused. This is super important. 95% of people who are homeless actually do have mobile phones, and they have access to, you know, Wi-Fi, and you don't have to have a data plan in order to access the internet. Prepaid phones might not have credits. They can get to the internet. Prem says, all of us connecting to VPN while kids are clogging the network with video calls. Yeah, we are temporarily disenfranchised from our internet when the kids are, or your wife, if my husband watches this, are playing video games, doing video chats. we got a fast internet to account for that. But I was really surprised to learn like how many people who are unhoused have access to mobile phones. So that is another reason why mobile first is important, because not everybody has 2 giant gaming screens in front of them. Or children who are doing homework during a pandemic. How many of y'all have seen this picture? Does anybody know the story behind this? For those that might not be able to see it, there are 2 children sitting on a curb outside while 2 workers are talking to them. So these are actually 2 kids that are sitting outside of a Taco Bell while their workers check what's going on. So during the coronavirus pandemic, these kids do not have internet at home. Yep, Karen, fast food restaurant with Wi-Fi. They don't have internet at their home, but the kids are still being expected to finish their homework working remotely. So the parents were like, hey, they have Wi-Fi at Taco Bell. You can sit outside, because nobody was allowed to sit inside of restaurants. In some areas, like, you still can't. So the kids were left outside to do their homework, and the parents were trying to do the best they could to make sure that their kids were still getting an education. Since the economy and our systems have shifted around us in the pandemic, we're being confronted with the flaws that our assumptions and systems have created. Like, cool, give the kids laptops, give them mobile devices, but this is kind of like having pipes with no water, right? Yeah. So another thing is that these users might need or even prefer alternative solutions to our technology. Rural folks say that the majority of them, high-speed internet is not a major problem for their local community. I actually talked to Kat about this because she lives in a rural community. It's like, what? I don't understand. Why would anybody not want fantastic, super fast internet? And she gave an example how there was an internet outage and it affected people, but they'll go instead, like, they're not dependent on the internet. They'll want like the printed publications, because they know, like, this is what we do in the rural areas. We want to be able to have an alternative copy, be able to get these books. Karen says that in her area, the local schools and library expanded their Wi-Fi to their parking lots. So that is a great solution for how you still serve a population and with an alternative solution. So these are some other important takeaways. I have them on the slide. I know I'm a little over time right now, so I'm going to go through this. But yeah, so to solve for this gamut of issues, how do you think we'll do that? We're going to start with step 1, building with room for the margins in the product from the beginning. You're taking the barriers to the situations that your users have into account. If you are building your products with accessibility standards at the core, you are making for robust user experiences, and you're making that infinitely easier for yourself. In step 2, you're going to want to consider how your product offsets marginalizing situations and how those offerings can be expanded. In this case, we know that for many of our users, they might not have a computer at home, and their phone is their only means of accessing the internet. So making sure that you're testing for mobile readiness at different speeds of internet as well, that's super important. You want to listen, learn, and adapt. So step 3, make sure that you take it step by step. It is a marathon to adopt accessibility. It is not a race. And there's actually different levels of success criterion for a reason. Does anybody know what the 3 different levels of accessibility compliance are according to the WCAG standards? Yay! Everyone gets an A. A, AA, and AAA. Most government sites, and there's government and financial sites, and I'm forgetting the third one right now, but they are required to meet at least AA standard. AAA is like the gold crown. It's the maximum 23 more criteria than at AA standards, which has 13. AA has I'm going to start from the beginning instead of trying to do this backwards because I don't math good all the time. A is, oh, so Karen says that in WCAG 3.0, you'll have bronze, silver, and gold. That'll be even more incentives for folks, at least competitive people. At level A, you have 25 criteria that you have to meet to get there. The AA standard is 13 more criteria in addition to the 25 from level A. Most sites are at that standard. And at AAA, you get 23 more criteria from the ones at AA standards. It's usually only used by multimedia sites. You and your teams are going to have discussions about what it is that you consider success. And you'll revise your expectations based on user feedback. So we're going to talk about, if we have time, Amy June, just some things that were unsuccessful implementations.
You have plenty of time.
Okay.
I have to apologize. I have to leave soon, and I wanted to take this opportunity to say how important it is what you're doing, because when we start to looking at answering all these questions, it helps us build better products for everyone. So by taking care of people who, it's like 20-year-old story about like we did these things on the sidewalks so that people in the disability chair can get on. Now everyone is using, moms with strollers, and there's more and more examples of this. So thank you very much for having this session. I think and I thank you for the way you structure it.
Well, thank you, Irina. That means a lot to me to hear this from you. It's so nice to see you.
Yeah, great seeing you. And I'm sorry, guys, I just have to take care of some people in the family, but it was great seeing you all. Thanks, and thanks for the presentation. Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Thanks.
Oh. Maybe I'll pause here before I share my story about how we did awful things. Does anybody have any questions or feedback? Should probably drink some water. I see Amy June says Craigslist is a perfectly themed website. So, no questions? Cool. I think some of you have heard the story before, if you know me for a bit. So when I worked at the city of Dallas, we had bots that were trying to log in to people's accounts because we put the username and password field on the same page, and that just makes automated attacks much easier. So we implemented a solution for it. We put the username and password on different pages, and then we added a third field where you got a randomized security question. A lot of the bots stopped coming, like we weren't getting hit as hard. And this was a pension website. So they were trying to get people's financial information to be able to do all kinds of nefarious things. However, even though the bot login attempts went away, we had a new problem where forgot your password page in Spanish jumped up to the top of the most requested list. And it's because we explained the policy in English, and we also didn't offer security questions in Spanish. I live in Dallas, Texas, and there's a large number of people that work for the city who are able to work and like have English working skills. And we didn't explain a technical website to them in Spanish. We had all kinds of offerings in Spanish on the site, but we just didn't think to make the rest of the site and all the features in Spanish. Thankfully, we were able to get that rectified. I have memories from having to figure that out. Prem, I saw that you shared something in the chat, and now I have lost the chat. Amy June, do you see what? I'm sorry.
It's a URL.
Okay. And Prem, what can you? This is latest news from the accessibility front. Legal standards. Let's see. If you get a chance to unmute and you'd like to share what that link is about, that'd be cool.
It's just what 3.0 has to say. It's not based on checklists like all the last 20 years we had. So it's very different, right? It's not just gold, silver, or bronze. It has to do with all inclusive, all groups, even though it's not covered in WCAG. For example, up to 2, it was mostly of blind users and cognitive, and 2.1, there were low vision users. Task force joined into, and there were a lot of guidelines on low vision. But WCAG recognized that these are not the only groups that needs to be covered. So they broadened the list and they removed the checklist item things in 3.0. It's still in draft, but yeah,
Cool.
it's promising.
I'll have to check it out. Thanks for sharing that. Let's see. And this example is like for an age group difference. So we had retirees that lost their pay stubs. It used to be that if they lost their pay stubs or they didn't get them in the mail, then they had to wait for another one to get mailed to them. Sometimes they didn't know that they needed it, or they needed one right away for financial transactions. They couldn't wait another month for it to come. So we made it so that they could get their pay stubs through the portal. And when I initially designed this page, I made the button very obvious, and it said download PDF. So they were able to get their pay stubs and they were excited. So the problem that happened is that someone modified the code and changed the language on the button to say print PDF instead of download PDF. What do y'all think happened? I worked the help desk at the time, if that helps out any. We got a, yeah, go ahead, Amy G.
Lots of folks just missing a step, assuming that their printer isn't hooked up or anything like that.
Yep. Karen says they clicked and went to their printers. They assumed that since it said that it was going to print, because there's plenty of websites where it says print and it will go to print, that it was going to print it right away. So I got to field that and ask, hey, why did we change the language on this? That was very intentional and told people that it was going to download. We changed it, thankfully. So the way to do all this diversity and accessibility work is through magic. Yeah? No, kidding. It's tools. There are lots of tools that you can use to make sure that you're both creating sites that are well done and accessible, usability principles centered. Prem, thanks for the smiley face. I'm kind of corny sometimes, so I appreciate that. But there's also testing tools that you can have. My colleague Kat has this really great presentation called How Cool Accessibility Tools Can Make Your Life Easier. We've linked to it in the presentation. But here are 5 categories that we covered when we did this together. And we'll go more in depth into this in Florida camp, the Florida camp workshop, just so you get some hands-on usage with it and you can test out. Web-based tools are the first category. They're used exclusively online. Kat says that you should bookmark the tools to your browser so you can use them as needed. Companies like the Pacello Group, DQ, who actually makes a course for the accessibility certification credentials that you can get. They do like a lot of great work, browser plugins for accessibility, WebAIM as well. They're all ways creating new open source tools. It's important to keep your eyes out for new ones. Browser tools are available as add-ons to your browser, so not just links to click on. Some of them are plugins and extensions. Others can be run from the dev tools. The DQ accessibility checker runs in the dev tools section. And most browsers now have versions in the main browsers like Chrome, Firefox, and Safari. Content management systems like Drupal. Woohoo! Drupal in the house, but also WordPress. Amy June loves the site improved browser extension. Yes, I like it too. But lots of us that are working on content management systems, we're trying to build that in either from the themes that we use or just like the basic core. I know like we went to requiring alt text to images, operating system tools. So these are tools that are already installed with the operating system on your computer. I have a Windows machine, so I know about some of these, but not as many as the Mac has. They generally work very well because they've gone through testing by the company that produced the OS itself. Cat wrote their exceptions to this rule, Internet Explorer, which I guess is why we have Edge now. But also desktop tools, those are things that can be downloaded and installed on your computer or your device, and used from your computer's desktop. Just to go over some of these, I am going to reserve some time just showing y'all. There's some for file compression. There's different ones for GIFs, JPEGs. Cat made all of these clickable. JavaScript bookmarklets for accessibility testing. And then there's WebAIM color contrast simulator. Browser tools for Chrome. There's color blinding, Colorzilla, the WCAG color contrast checker. You've also got the ARC Toolkit, Axe, and Lighthouse Audit for Chrome DevTools. These are available as add-ons for the browser. And for our content management tools, in Drupal, you have Drupal Accessibility, as well as the Olivero theme, which I named, which was exciting. It's named after Rachel Olivero, who contributed so much to Drupal and Drupal accessibility. So it's fitting that, you know, we named an accessible theme after someone that's done so much. It's new, fully accessible, and now it's a default theme in Core for WordPress, which I'm not as familiar with, but there's Make WordPress Accessible Handbook and Useful WordPress Development Tools. OS Tools has a lot. I'm a Windows user. There's a list of Mac tools. Is anybody like familiar with any of these and wants to speak to like how useful they've been or what their favorite one is? That's cool. And then desktop tools, I use NVDA as my screen reader that I use to do testing. It is a different experience for a person who is sighted and used to just ingesting the data from the screen to hear it in a screen reader. If you have not done it before, like definitely give that a try because you're going to understand how low vision and non-sighted users are presented these websites that we're making on the internet. Like I think if you do anything, if you do any kind of accessibility testing, like make sure that you try to use a screen reader, listen to it, and hear how your site is going. I have a PDF that I'll share that teaches you more about how people are actually using it. It's not just hitting tab. There's different shortcuts, but Acrobat makes a PDF accessibility checker. Yeah, but moving on, in summary, as technologists, like we should be holding ourselves and our dev communities accountable for things like good coding standards, but also for implementing inclusion. Like it's just as important. I think that we tend to, especially when we're under tight deadlines, like we want to take shortcuts, but to me, accessibility is the area that we don't want to take those shortcuts on. Because not only are you impacting people who have a disability, either permanent, temporary, anything in between, but you're also shortchanging yourself of the chance to build an inclusive web experience for people who are in the margins, people that are already experiencing disproportionate situations. Accessibility and usability principles give us ways to do both of those, and we should be taking full advantage of it. And there are a bunch of pretty cool tools that will help us accomplish it. So, you know, we don't have a lot of excuses for why we can't make the world a better place. The internet's part of the world now. So thanks a lot for listening and hanging out. Ta-da!
That's very Lullabot of you.
I know, right?
So I want to piggyback on the statement you last made about inclusion and accessibility, because I work in accessibility and I think of inclusion in different ways. You know, but like we have to remind ourselves of the fringe cases, I think people forget about that, like how people use an array of user agents differently, and in a combination of those, like, yeah, sure, you can access it by the keyboard, but what if you have someone that can't find their mouse and then like has to zoom in to 200% and all of a sudden they can't access the controls? So there's like all these little aspects to think about, and like really like building our empathy about how different people use the products, I think is really important.
There was a summer where I can't remember if I couldn't use the mouse or I couldn't find it. Something happened, but I had to navigate using the keyboard. This was like a long time ago, but it's a different experience.
I can never find my mouse, and so or my mouse is one of those ones that plugs in, but I forget that it's plugged into a peripheral. So I'm like, how come my mouse doesn't work? Because the peripheral's not plugged in. Yep. So
I broke 2 fingers playing dodgeball once, and so I had, when you break your fingers, they put them in a splint, and you have to keep your hand as still as possible. However, at the time I was using Windows Machine and I was using a mouse, and I couldn't navigate with a mouse, and it made my job so difficult that I don't play dodgeball anymore.
It was a Windows mouse, in case people forgot what they look like.
Yeah, well, a mouse in general for most
yeah.
laptop users is like, what's this mouse thing you're talking about? But, so one of my first programming jobs, I was working at AOL, and our CTO was blind, which is why accessibility was drilled into my head, because we would have to show him these features. I use the word show him, like he could see, and like these were people that were talking about him in the same room as him, and he was just like, yeah, you need to fix this now. And that was like why I dove headfirst into accessibility, and every time it's kind of been, frankly, it's been beaten into me, but still, it's still a thing that happens. But you were talking about fringe cases, you also have to think about the temporarily disabled folks as well, who all of a sudden can't use their hands or have surgery and they're trying to work and they can't use things that they're normally being able to use. And it's always funny. We had a client that they had a problem with, they had a Windows users, and they had this great pop-up that looked beautiful, but they were using these older machines that had 1024 resolution. They couldn't close the screen to continue to pay their bills, which was what they were there to do. And of course, and you mentioned working a call center at the time, what did they do? They called and complained bitterly, and that's not what, as developers and web UX people, need to do. You need to take that, the whole point of your job is to keep the call center down, especially this time in the COVID world where call centers are low staffed because they have to be.
Yeah. Prim says devs should be recognized and rewarded for implementing inclusion. So some ways should start with managers. Though it's the responsibility of devs to code according to standards. I think that, that's very important, because I think there's a couple of people that are like technical project managers that are on the line, or even like managers of humans. Like, we're often the ones that are setting the standards that developers are going to. And if we don't make it important, then, a dev that's just trying to get their job done, if they don't, one of the things I noticed in the conversation that Amy June and I had before this is like, and even like what Mark shared, if you are not personally impacted by it, or if you don't know somebody that's impacted by disability issues, or even like these diversity and inclusion issues that dovetail into that, it's just not at the top of your mind. And Karen pointed out that nowadays kids at home and their interruptions end up being an accessibility issue. I know I tried to fill out an Eventbrite form, and there was a timer on it, and every time I looked up, I was past the 8 minutes. So, yep. A great conversation.
I think sometimes as a developer, I'm guilty of not realizing how sophisticated users are and how much they recognize good UX. And I really learned this when, I guess about a year ago, Canopy asked me to accompany one of our designers to go visit the county jail because we were doing a website for the sheriff's department. And we had to sit in the lobby and talk to, like, basically it was mostly family members visiting their loved ones in prison or in jail. And we had to interview them and ask them, you know, how they felt about the sheriff's, the old website, you know, and what were their frustrations. I couldn't believe how much people wanted to talk to us, how many of them had like a whole list of things that was wrong with the old site. And they were really sophisticated things. I mean, I was like ready to hire some of these people. I was like, you know, because they had like incredible insight. And it was a real humbling experience, because I think I figured, like, you know, us, you know, we developers think about these things, but regular people don't think about this stuff, you know, but they do. They care, and it matters.
Yeah. People remember bad experiences, and especially if you have a loved one that's incarcerated, like that's a stressful situation already, right? And then
Right.
add on to that, like, I can't get on, I can't, you know, help post bond for this person. I'm
Right.
gonna like telegraph that I do not know like exactly what happens, but if there's a way to pay for commissary online
Yeah.
and it's a bad experience, like you could end up with a loved one that doesn't get to eat.
Yeah.
Well, hey, folks, I have hockey, so I'm going to drop off. And thanks a lot.
Be careful. Don't break anything.
Right?
Fine. And then also in June, and if you don't see me in the morning, you'll know why.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's funny how like experiencing those fringe cases on your own is like super enlightening, because like I live rurally, so sometimes I don't have any access on my mobile device, or it's so slow that images don't come up, or my fields, you know, I type in my field form and it takes a minute. And so all that user experience, I think, is super insightful. You know, it's but what's sad is sometimes it's that, like you had said before, it really takes those like experiencing it yourself or having a loved one experience it that really brings it home.
Well, excellent presentation, Tearyne. Thank you.
Thanks.
That's great.
Bye, Karen.
So I'm going to hit stop unless anyone else has any more questions or comments or insights or anything like that.
I'm going to ask questions after you stop recording.
Okay. Okay, so I am